Welcome to this special episode of the Bitchonistim. I'm your host for today, Ari Kolker, and I'm honored to be joined here by Brigadier General Amir Avivi. We're going to discuss Lebanon, Hezbollah, Hamas, Iran, the Saudi Arabia. We're going to discuss everything today. Before we get into it, though, please remember, like, subscribe, share, click, do all the things that you do to keep seeing our content. Amir is the chairman of the IDSF. He's also the founder. He's held an enormous number of positions throughout his military career. Currently, they advise ministers, members of Knesset, the prime minister, defense ministers, and so on and so forth. And now, let's get into the show. Let's start off with the north. This war started down south with Hamas, but right now, everyone's talking about Hezbollah in the north. Let's talk about the north. If we look at it from the beginning of this war on October 8th, the war started October 7th. On October 8th, Hezbollah got their feet in the door and started shooting missiles at Israel nonstop. The government decided here that we're going to remove all of the residents from northern Israel, approximately 80,000 people, in order to protect their lives and keep them safe, and give us time to fight in the south. Historically, we've known Hezbollah to be the insurance policy for Iran, to make sure that we wouldn't attack their nuclear facilities and we wouldn't get involved in their inner workings because we had a threat right on our border. Now that we can see that threat is more of a paper dragon, we've decimated the Hezbollah leadership, we've started attacking it. How do you see the northern front developing, and what are its effects going to be on Iran?
So we have to understand first what happened on the 7th of October. We were caught in a huge surprise, terrible, tragic day with 1,200 people massacred, a state of shock. And a day later, Hezbollah started shooting us also, and Israel had to take a decision. We were in a multi-front war. We had to take a decision where this is going. How are we going to manage this? And the reality was that throughout the last 20 years, the IDF, with the consent of the government, has closed approximately 3 divisions, which means less 100,000 soldiers in the IDF. The IDF also didn't procure enough munitions to sustain a long war and to sustain a war on several fronts. And therefore, due to this reality, the decision that was made was we're going to be on the offensive in Gaza and on the defense on all other fronts, including Lebanon. It wasn't a easy decision to make. It was a hard decision, but this is the decision that was made. And this decision held 11 months. For 11 months, Israel has been on the offensive in Gaza and on the defense on all other fronts, trying to avoid a big war in the north. In Gaza, I must say that at the beginning, we didn't operate with all the army. We left many units in the north to make sure there won't be a war, and then gradually we moved more and more units to the south and extended the fight. A month ago, maybe a month and a half ago, we felt in IDSF that the moment has come to shift the center of gravity from the south to the north. We wrote a very elaborate paper discussing this. We presented it to the Prime Minister, to the Minister of Defense, and we said, this is the moment. The terms are now such that we can move the center of gravity to the north. What we saw was that Hamas, at this stage, was pretty dismantled as a military entity. Almost all the battalions, apart of one, were dismantled. Yes, Hamas still has some rockets. They're scattered around Gaza. You see fighting here and there, but this is not an army. Now it's more kind of guerrilla fighting in different places, not organized, not controlled. Hamas cannot renew itself. We closed Philadelphia, the border between Gaza and Egypt. So they are not able to smuggle weapons into Gaza and capabilities or terrorists. We destroyed all the industries inside Gaza, so Hamas cannot produce. We knew all along, and I've talked about that many times throughout the last 11 months, that the moment Israel will decide to move from the defense to the offense in the north, we'll see a completely different reality. We'll see things we cannot imagine. Why? Because I knew many of the plans we have prepared for the northern war. But I must say that even I was surprised at the level of success of the defense establishment of the IDF. We saw the pagers, we saw communications exploding, we saw very fast how the IDF is able to topple all the leadership of Hezbollah. And this created a reality that in 2-3 weeks, Hezbollah is pretty much on its knees. There is no command and control commanding the different forces. Everything that we're seeing now is on the local level. Some rockets shooting here, some rockets there, but really Hezbollah is not really functioning as an organization. I remember for years that when we talked about what will be the scenario, what we'll see, we talked about something like 2,000 rockets and missiles shot at Israel every single day. This is not what we're seeing. We're seeing rockets here and there, but this is not what we expected because we're breaking Hezbollah as an organization. And at this stage, Israel also launched a limited ground incursion into Lebanon to dismantle all the infrastructure Hezbollah has built along the border. It's an infrastructure that was intended to enable Hezbollah to launch a fast attack into Israel to do the same massacre as Hamas did on the 7th of October. Tunnels with motorcycles, with cars, with a lot of munitions, all in proximity to the border. And the IDF is systematically destroying this infrastructure, killing the terrorists. Many of them fled north. And now we're at a stage where the big question is the IDF going to expand the ground incursion beyond the few kilometers they're operating? Maybe to the Litani, maybe a bit less. It's not clear. The Northern Command is trying to push for a larger ground incursion because they feel that they're succeeding, that Hezbollah is not fighting really effectively, and this is an opportunity. And the second question is, when the government and the IDF say, we want to create the terms to bring back all the displaced citizens that have been displaced for a year safely home, what is needed? Is it enough to dismantle this infrastructure and then get out back to the border? Or you need to have Israeli soldiers on the other side? And I think from our perspective, it's crystal clear that if you want to really convince the society to go back home after they saw all these tunnels and all this infrastructure, the IDF needs to be on the Lebanese side to defend the citizens for a very long time until some kind of viable agreement will be reached. And we don't know what future holds. We don't know if there will be Hezbollah in the future. We don't know if we'll manage to really mobilize the Sunnis, the Christians, the Maronis, the Druze to deal with Hezbollah, to really seize the moment that Hezbollah is weak enough that maybe they can get rid of them. So it's a big question whether they're going to be proactive or not. But at the moment, we can control what we are doing, and what we are doing is continue to really attack fiercely Hezbollah in order to weaken them more and more until we set the terms for their destruction. And this is not a goal of war that was set. The goal of war is returning the citizens back safely home. But now that we have such a level of success, we have an opportunity to maybe update the goal of war in Lebanon and say we can actually destroy them. We can actually make sure that Hezbollah is not going to stay anymore in Lebanon, and maybe create a completely different reality in Lebanon, one that we haven't seen in the last decades,
Since the 70s, when it was
probably
when it was the Paris of the Middle East.
Right.
But how can our success against Hezbollah in Lebanon be translated to the greater conflict that we have with Iran? If we view Hezbollah and Hamas purely as proxies for Iran, that any battle we have with them is really just a battle against Iran, almost the Cold War, where the U.S. and Vietnam fighting the USSR in different ways. How does now the balance of power that we've created, where Hamas is on its knees and almost completely dismantled, as you've described, Hezbollah is on its knees now and on the verge of being dismantled, how does that shift the balance of power now and create an opportunity for Israel to now go after Iran?
So Iran's strategy is to build strategic depths. The Iranians don't want to fight themselves. This is why they created all these proxies, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, Houthis in Yemen, militias in Iraq, militias in Syria. They think all the time about strategic depths. And what Israel is doing is dismantling these depths they created, dismantling Hamas, dismantling Hezbollah very, very fast. And this creates a reality in Iran that they feel exposed. They feel that now they are in serious danger. They don't have all these forces defending. Also, the Houthis are being attacked constantly by a coalition and also by Israel. And when Iran sees how fast we are able to dismantle Hezbollah and how much we penetrated their ranks and really, how deep the Israeli intelligence goes, they also think, okay, what can they do to us? They are very, very worried. And what might happen now is that because they feel exposed, they might really push much faster the nuclear plans. So we are entering a completely new phase where Israel, as it's dismantling Hamas and Hezbollah, is starting to shift a new center of gravity, moving from our borders to dealing with Iran, with an understanding that a war with Iran will not stop until this regime is on its knees, until we really make sure they cannot pose any danger to Israel, that they don't have a nuclear plan, that their military capabilities are dealt with. Now, this is a kind of campaign. It's not a week, it's not a month, it's a long campaign. And how long it will be, it really, at a certain stage, depends on what happens in the U.S. Because it's going to be long, it's going to go into the elections in the U.S. and also January, a new president, whether it will be Trump or Kamala Harris. And then the big question will be, what will be the next administration's policy? If the policy will be, we need to deal militarily with Iran, the whole process will be accelerated. Then you might see a coalition being built and a very, very strong attack on Iran and all its military and nuclear sites. And what we did in 1 week in Lebanon, a coalition can do in 3 days in Iran. This is not about boots on the ground. This is not about 20 years in Iraq or in Afghanistan. I know that the U.S., has really suffered a lot from, the consequences of these wars in the Middle East, which
stuck
went
in the Middle
nowhere.
Eastern mud.
So there is a sense, in the U.S., we have had it with the Middle East. That's it, Why should we be involved again in a war? But it's not about that. This is really an airstrike, 1 or 2 or 3, maybe airstrikes, and that's it. And the whole thing will be dismantled. The Shia axis will be destroyed. This will change the whole Middle East. This will change the globe. This will position again the U.S. as a very strong and proactive military force. This might deter the Chinese from attacking in Taiwan. This might deter the Russians in Europe. It will have a huge effect. And also it might bring a whole peace agreement in the Middle East. But if the U.S. continues to pursue the same policy we saw until now, a policy that is all about appeasement and ceasefires, then Israel will have to fight alone. And this will take more time. But we understand that there is only one solution. We need to win decisively on all fronts, and also on the Iranian front. So as people discuss what is Israel going to do before the elections and whether there will be some attack, my answer is it's not about that. It doesn't matter what Israel will do until the elections. Anything we'll do is just the beginning of a long-term campaign that needs to end with victory.
All right, so part of reshaping the Middle East, toppling the Shia axis and Iran, we come back now to Gaza, to Hamas. We talked about Hezbollah as Iranian's proxy in the north. We have Hamas as the proxy in our south. That's been, for lack of a better word, a thorn in our side since forever. As someone who spent the first 5 months of this war in the brigade that led the initial invasion into Gaza, we've created a new reality that hasn't existed in Gaza since before it came into our possession in 1967. We've created a reality where now we have, from what I can tell, from where I sit, total military control over the area. We have freedom of operation at this point pretty much everywhere. Frame for us and explain to us what was the thinking and the process of what the IDF has done in Gaza till now, and let's think a little bit about what the future holds for Gaza. What's the solution? Do we make an agreement with Hamas and leave and get is the ground ripe for a hostage negotiation? Can we even negotiate with Hamas? Is there anyone to talk to? And what does Gaza look like in a year from now and 10 years from now?
So we have to remember what were the goals of war that were set at the beginning of the war. First goal was to eradicate Hamas as a military and governmental entity. So this war is not going to end until Hamas is eradicated. There is no negotiation with Hamas. Hamas cannot stay in power in Gaza. No entity that massacred us, like they did on the 7th of October, will stay alive. So we'll continue until Hamas is eradicated as a military and governmental entity. And as a military entity, we're on our way to eradicate them, but they are still governing the Palestinians in Gaza. And this needs to change in order to really disconnect between Hamas and the society. You need Israel to step in. You need Israel to control also the civil side, especially controlling the humanitarian aid, which at present is simply sent into Gaza. Hamas seizes this aid. They bring it to the warriors, so it extends the war, and then they sell it for an overpriced amount of money to their own citizens, and they also control them through the humanitarian aid. This cannot continue. So we heard Prime Minister Netanyahu, when he spoke in the UN, addressing this issue and saying this is not a reality that is sustainable, and we won't agree to continue with this reality. But at present, I don't see the cabinet issuing any clear orders to the army to take control completely of the civil side and of the humanitarian aid. It hasn't happened yet. It needs to happen in order to bring down Hamas as a military and governmental entity in Gaza. And I expect the cabinet to really push this with the army as fast as possible. This will enable the IDF to also put a siege on Hamas warriors in areas where there are no citizens. So the idea is to move all the citizens to the designated humanitarian zone. Most of them are there already, but
Right.
there are like 200,000 Palestinians in North Gaza, which need to be moved also to the humanitarian zone. Once you don't have citizens in North Gaza or in most of Khan Yunis or Rafah, then in these areas you can put a siege, make sure there is no humanitarian aid at all that can reach Hamas terrorists, and this will accelerate their fall instead of feeding them. So there are still tools of war that Israel hasn't used. So at the moment, what Israel is doing mostly is continuing with raids in places where Israel sees that Hamas is organizing again. As for the hostages, I believe that the goal that says eradicating Hamas as a military and governmental entity and the goal that says bringing back all the hostages are connected. I think that the fall of Hamas will bring the hostages back. The society will cooperate with us and give us back the hostages, because the Palestinian society is stuck on the beach, in tents, for an indefinite period of time. Most of the people that are really, really fed up. Hamas is shooting them, terrorizing them, taking their humanitarian aid. So I think more and more people are fed up with Hamas. And if we degrade them enough, I hope the Palestinians there will be emboldened enough to deal also with themselves with Hamas. And we need to bring Hamas to the stage where the society says, okay, that's it. We're not willing to sustain this war the way it is now. We want to go back home. We want to rebuild our lives. And we understand this cannot happen without handing the Israelis the hostages. And Israel needs to say there will be no end of the war until all the goals are reached. Hamas is eradicated and the hostages are back. And if this doesn't happen, you are going to stay on the beach, in the tents, for an indefinite period of time until this happens. Israel has a lot of leverage here. In the reality that Israel created, and time is playing in favor of Israel, not in favor of Gaza, because we are all the time degrading them more and more and reaching the goals of war, and they're stuck where they're stuck in a life they're all probably they all want to change. The last goal of war, last but not least, is creating the terms that never again there will be a terror army in Gaza. And then the question is, what are the terms? What needs to happen in order not to have a terror army in Gaza? So as long as you have a society that is hateful towards Israel, a society that if you leave will rebuild immediately the terror capabilities, Israel needs to have overriding security responsibility over the Gaza Strip, whether we manage the civil life or not. I'm talking about military overriding security.
Right.
Means we need to control Philadelphia corridor. We cannot allow, again, a buildup of power with capabilities that are coming from Egypt into Gaza. And we need full freedom of operation everywhere in Gaza for an indefinite period of time to foil any attempt to build again terror infrastructure, just as we are doing in Judea and Samaria, in cities like Jenin or Ramallah or Hebron. We need freedom of operation. As for the civil side, there needs to be a transition. Nobody can step and take responsibility instead of Hamas at the beginning, but Israel. There needs to be a transition where Israel manages things for a while, tries to really create a process of de-radicalization. Only Israel can lead a process like that, working with Saudi Arabia, working with the Emirates, working with Europe and the US. But nobody will do the job for us. We need to manage a process of de-radicalization in Gaza, which might take a long time. And only then maybe you can build local leadership of clans in the different cities, a kind of like city-states, like the Emirates, like Dubai, Abu Dhabi. Can Gaza be Dubai? Maybe, but in a very long term and really going through process of de-radicalization and completely different education system and so on. Only then you can really rebuild something in Gaza. I also think, personally, I think that a big part of the Palestinians who live today in Gaza would like to emigrate. They're not allowed to because the Egyptians have blocked the border and are not letting them go out. They let only 100, I think around 300,000 people to live, and they paid a lot of money for that. I don't think that it's human to force somebody to stay in a place they don't want to stay. I mean, in Ukraine, 8 million people left Ukraine. Nobody told them you cannot cross the border or you cannot try to rebuild your life somewhere else. So I think that people that actually really don't want to be in Gaza, and there are many people like that, should be allowed to live and should be able to do so if they want to. It's not happening at the moment. But this is also something that might change things in Gaza.
All right. So we talked about Hezbollah up north and Gaza down south. We touched on Iran, but let's look at the neighborhood we're in from a zoomed out perspective. From we're not alone in the Middle East. We have the Abraham Accords shows that we do have friends or people that are at least willing to sit around the table with us. And no solution, even the long-term solution in Gaza, it doesn't become a part of the state of Israel directly. And in Lebanon, as we've seen in the past, from Israel staying in Lebanon for the long term, it doesn't necessarily create a long-term solution. In the long-term solution, we need to look at the broader neighborhood and the region in which we're living. We have Saudi Arabia, and we have the Emirates that you spoke about. Let's talk for a minute about how, in cooperation with our Sunni neighbors, with the American leadership, the strong American leadership, we can reshape the entire Middle East to one that provides safety and prosperity for everybody involved, not just Israel and not just the Saudis, but for all of the people living in the region. We can bring prosperity and security back through cooperation and then expand our influence in the region.
So in order to talk about expanding peace, we need to understand the interest behind the willingness of Saudi Arabia or other countries to normalize relations with Israel for many, many years. This looked like something impossible. They used to say to us that if we don't solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, there will be no peace. But then we had 4 peace agreements in the Middle East and beyond, the Abraham Accords. And we need to understand what changed. And what changed is that for many, many years, there was a very strong and clear alliance between the US and the Sunni world. It started after the Second World War in a meeting between President Roosevelt and the Saudi king in the Red Sea. They sat and decided on an alliance. And the idea was the US will assist securing Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states. And Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states will make sure that the US has plenty of oil to sustain the growing economy of the US. And this has been going on for a long time. And when there were problems like Iraq invading Kuwait, this was important enough for the US to take a whole army twice and fight and conquer a whole state like Iraq. So we understand how crucial this was to the US to keep the interest of the flow of oil from the Middle East to the US. But when Obama stepped into office, this changed completely. And the reason why it changed is that in Obama's time, for the first time, due to the fracking industry, the US became completely independent and able to produce all the oil it needs. Not only that, the US started producing so much oil that for the first time a law that was passed that enables the US to export oil to the world, and the US became a huge exporter of oil and gas. And suddenly the Middle East, from being a very big asset, became contesters in the selling of oil. The Middle East lost its strategic importance for the US. So when Obama entered office in this reality, he basically started thinking completely from scratch about the relationships in the Middle East. And in his view, the growing force in the Middle East was Iran. And in a blink of a moment, he shifted alliances from the Sunni world to the Iranians and started dealing with Iran. This was a shock to the whole Sunni world. They understood that they are experiencing a historical strategic change, which created 2 phenomena. From an economical point of view, Saudi Arabia understood They cannot rely just on oil because they lost leverage.
Okay.
And it's not enough to be a strong player globally. So they started moving, taking the big amount of money they were getting from oil and investing in other industries, changing completely the economy, including, by the way, going into football. And we saw Mundial and Ronaldo playing in Saudi Arabia now and so on. Very big change. And the other issue, this has to do also with Israel, is the understanding that they cannot completely rely on the US. And they saw Israel standing strong throughout Obama's presidency against Iran and not allying with the US on that. Israel all the time said Iran is the danger, Iran is the enemy. We need to make sure Iran won't be nuclear. This is exactly the kind of messaging that was relevant also to the Sunni world. And they started to understand that they need to partner with Israel, that Israel is a key player. When Iran attacked Saudi Arabia, Aramco, and destroyed 50% of the oil production of Saudi Arabia, and in this event, American technologies failed, couldn't stop this attack, and even after the attack, America didn't respond. Then this convinced the Gulf states and Saudi Arabia they must really get much closer relations with Israel, rely on Israeli technology, Israeli capabilities, air defense, intelligence. And this was what created really the terms for the Abraham Accords. And then when Trump stepped into the office, this was already ready to move forward. Since then, several things happened that are creating a new reality we need to address. The US withdrew from Afghanistan, and this created waves in the Middle East and an understanding among the Sunnis, the radical Sunnis, but also the Shias, that the US is weak. They can seize the moment, they can take over the Middle East, they can be more proactive. As they were celebrating Afghanistan, Russia-Ukraine started. This emboldened also the Russians. And the dynamics of the Russian-Ukrainian war created a reality that Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, which were all under sanctions, started getting closer and closer together and created a new front. I remember in January 2023, 10 months before the 7th of October, CIA director announced formally there is a Chinese, Russian, Iranian front in the Middle East. A complete change globally. And suddenly, a new reality, the East has created a front challenging the West in Europe, in the Middle East, in Africa, and maybe also in the Pacific. And I remember that we arrived in, I think it was around May, to the US, to Washington. We talked with Senate, Congress, the Foreign Relations Committee about this new reality. And we said, you must be proactive, stand strong, stabilize the Middle East. If you don't do so, the Middle East will go into war. There will be a multi-front war in the Middle East. We anticipated that. We talked about that for 2 years. We wrote a whole paper really describing what is going to happen. And following that, I even published a book talking about that. So we saw this coming. And we saw what will be the consequences of this front that has emerged. It wasn't until China brokered a deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran that the administration realized that this is actually happening, and states are starting to move towards this new magnet, this Chinese, Russian, Iranian front. And with lack of American leadership, they are moving east. And then the administration changed policies end to end and decided to start pushing an alliance with Saudi Arabia, trying to build a coalition, normalize relations. And Saudi Arabia is not just one more Abraham Accord country. This is the leader of the Sunni world. Normalizing relations with Saudi Arabia means normalizing relations with Indonesia, with Malaysia, with Pakistan, with Oman. This is a huge alliance. Now, when the Iranians saw that this is about to happen and that this big coalition or alliance is going to emerge, they say, okay, we're not going to let this happen. And they launched Hamas to an attack in order to really stop this process, disrupt it. So if we want to bring this process back, and we really, all of us, the West, Israel, the Sunni world, we need this alliance from a military point of view, but also economical point of view. The path to creating this alliance is a victory on all fronts. It's a victory in Gaza, in Lebanon, and against Iran. It's breaking the Shia axis. Israel is handling to the U.S. an historical victory on a platter, on a silver platter. And instead of
embracing
it, joining with Israel, and in one or two airstrikes, finishing this, farce, the administration is still trying to push ceasefires. Now, I don't know, as we are doing this interview 3 weeks before the elections in the U.S., I don't know who will win. But if this administration is going to lose the elections, they can blame only themselves, because the Americans are patriotic and they want to see leadership, and they understand how crucial is the leadership of the U.S. globally. And when the U.S. is not standing strong against this pure evil of the Shia axis and what Hamas did to Israel, when they don't start strong with the closest ally of the U.S., I think this is disappointing for many, many Americans. So you have maybe a small group that is on the radical left and makes a lot of noise. I don't think this is America. I think that America, overall, is a very patriotic nation. I remember when I met one of the high officials of the U.S. Just a day before the attack against Nasrallah, and we were discussing what's going on, and he kept saying to me again and again, we need a ceasefire, we need to de-escalate, we need to stop. And I told him, as I was waiting for the meeting, I was sitting in the hall, looking at the symbol of the U.S., the eagle, holding arrows, in one hand, an olive branch on the other, but an eagle, not a dove. And I think that sometimes the leadership of America forget the basic DNA of this nation and why it was created. And it wasn't created as a dove. It was created as an eagle.
Very much so.
And in order to really have world peace and have stability and prosperity, you cannot reach this without being strong, without projecting power. We had Yom Kippur now, and between going to the synagogue and the prayers, and the 2 hours, 3 hours between, I sat and read one of the 6 books of Churchill, describing, the very dramatic moment when he stepped into office, when the British army was surrounded in Dunkirk. France fell, Paris fell. Even at this really dramatic moment when basically the Nazis conquered all of Europe, it seemed like in any moment they will invade Britain. The British army surrounded. Even this wasn't enough for the US to decide they need to fight. It's only years later when the Japanese
attacked Pearl
attacked
Harbor.
in Pearl Harbor, they waked up. It's not easy to wake the U.S.
No,
It's not
not.
easy. But I can tell you, we had a meeting with Pompeo, and he said to us, guys, don't wait for the U.S. You need to be proactive, do your thing. You start,
We'll
the U.S.
catch
will
up.
join later. And this is what Israel is doing. Israel needs to be proactive. And us, we are going to show that this is successful. We're succeeding. We're winning the war. I hope there will be a moment where the U.S. will show leadership, and this will accelerate everything, and this will bring peace and prosperity. And I really believe that the bigger the win will be, the more decisive this win will be on all fronts, the greater the golden age of Israel and the Jewish people will be the day after. The day after, there will be peace agreements, and the economy will bloom, and there will be massive aliyah to Israel. There will be baby boom. We have a great future ahead of us, but in order to reach this future, we need to stay united and fight until victory, and hope that our allies
We'll join in.
will join us in this important fight, not just for Israel, but for the whole Western society.
So if we stop for a minute and take a look back, the beginning of a relationship with Saudi Arabia and the Sunni world would at first be a military, an alliance based around the military support one of the other to create the security and stability in the region to combat the Iran, China, Russia front, and to restabilize the region around the Israel, American, Saudi Arabia front in the Sunni world. In order for that to happen, it requires strong American leadership, balanced with strong Israeli leadership on our side. In order, as someone who grew up in the United States and then later made Aliyah, in order to get the American people, and you need to explain to them what we're doing. We fall into the realm of Hasbara, not just the diplomatic level, but also on the communications level. What have we been doing so wrong that we have college campuses exploding with support for our enemies, for the pure evil? Like you've said many times, and like we've all witnessed, what happened here on Simchat Torah last year on October 7th was the embodiment of pure evil in this world. Yet we have college campuses across the U.S. supporting that behavior and those actions and our enemies. Where have we gone wrong? What do we need to do different? I don't like using the word Hasbara because I don't really think that we need to explain to anyone who and what we are. But for lack of a better term, we'll keep using it for now. What can and should we be doing differently in that front?
In context of the war, the best explanation we can give to the world is winning decisively. When we win decisively, everybody will be on Israeli side. Okay, everybody likes winners. But if we go deeper into the issue of what is happening in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, is that basically each nation has a story, and in every story you have a hero and you have a villain. And what our enemies have done to us, and it started as a Russian propaganda in the 60s, and then the Russians also brought the Palestinian issue into this propaganda. They've tried to make us the villains in our own story, instead of being the heroes of our own story. Now, the Jewish people have the greatest story in the globe. All nations in the world admire our history. All religions, were created, Christians, Muslims, based on Judaism, on our story. And we forgot that we are the heroes of our own story. And there is no middle ground. You need to choose. Are you a hero or are you a villain? And if you are a hero, the story needs to be coherent and simple. And it's very simple. We are the people of Israel. This is the land of Israel. We are the ancestral people of this land. We have built all our nation in this land. We wrote the Bible here. We were expelled from our land forcibly. We prayed for many years to go back. And now we came back to take our land. That's it. This is the story of Zionism and the Jewish people. And when people start breaking this story into pieces and saying, no, maybe we are occupiers in part of our land, maybe the heart of our land is occupied, It doesn't make sense anymore. It's not a coherent story, and it's not exciting. It doesn't make sense. And then Palestinians come. They have no history. They never existed. And they come with a very simple story, which is completely false, but still a very simple story. From the river to the sea, Palestine needs to be free, meaning all the Jews need to be in the sea. And if you don't have an answer, if you don't know who you are, if you don't know that this is your land, then you lost at the first moment, you lost the debate. Because if somebody says this is Palestine and you're conquering us, and you're saying, no, maybe we need to cut it half and half, maybe most of it is occupied, not all of it is occupied. This is not a story. And if from the very beginning you are the villain in the story, you cannot become a hero just by saying, but we have great high tech and we produce wine and
cherry tomatoes.
Yeah, that's not the story. The story is the resurrection of the Jewish people in their homeland. This is the story. And I think that it needs to start by really focusing on the Jews. We need to connect back to our own story and be proud of who we are, our history, our heritage. This is what Judaism is about, Zionism. And this is holistic. You cannot break down the story. And you need to differentiate between values and problem solving. It's two completely different things. I wrote in my book 4 different solutions for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I'm all about solutions. My father was an ambassador, diplomat, I like to discuss solutions. But I don't approach a solution by thinking that this is not my land. I know we are the Jewish people. I know this is the land of Israel. We are the people of Israel, and this is our land. Now, let's seek solutions, practical solutions to the problems we are facing, on the pragmatic side. And I think that many of the organizations in the U.S. that are trying to fight anti-Semitism and are trying to raise money to do this fighting, and then they say to themselves, okay, but we want to raise as much money as possible from everybody. So if we make a stand, saying, for example, Judea and Samaria, which is the heart of our land, all our history is there, right? It's the Bible Belt. If we embrace this, then we won't
We're going to alienate somebody.
We won't get donations, so we won't talk about that. But the moment you don't talk about that, that's it. You are not relevant. You're not telling the story. What's the story? And therefore, I think like 80-90% of the organizations that are supposedly fighting anti-Semitism are not doing it effectively because they're not telling the story. There is no half story. Are you heroes or villains? Decide. There is no middle ground here. And it confuses Jews. And, Jews get disconnected and don't understand their own story. And the other thing is that you want to be relevant, you need to talk to the heart. It's not just about the mind. It's not just about information. It's about exciting people who they are. You fight in a unit, and you know that one of the most important things in the army, when you need to mobilize a unit to fight, you need to mobilize soldiers to endanger their lives. If you don't get them connected together and, strong and excited, and
if you don't believe in what you're doing,
believing in what they're doing, it's very hard to mobilize the people.
Very hard.
You cannot tell them half a story. You need to really get them excited. And one of the things I think we're trying to do in IDSF as an organization, almost 40,000 Israeli officers, commanders, operators in reserve and retired, that have spent years and years building this strength in the army, is to bring these ways of building this excitement into the communities, into the Jewish world, and reminding people of who they are. And there is nothing greater than being an Israeli and a Jew. Every day I wake up, I say, thanks God for, giving me the privilege of being part of the Jewish people.
Well, all right. So before we go, we ask that we end every episode on a positive, on an optimistic note. You've shared with us many great visions for the future, both of Israel and of the entire Middle East as a region. Try and condense that down to me for one vision of what Israel needs to do to be a strong, prosperous, safe leader in our region and on a global scale moving forward.
So when I look at the day after this war, don't know how long it will be, it might be very long, but the day after this war, the Israeli society needs to be built on three pillars that complement each other. First, this needs to be a society of people who serve the country. Everybody needs to serve. I think that we understand today that in order to deal with the challenges in the Middle East, to be a strong country and make sure that never again the Jewish people will be in danger, we need to have a very, very strong army, big army. We need to be able to defend ourselves by ourselves. And for this, we need everybody to serve. And I think it's an historical opportunity to really get all parts of the society, and especially the Jewish society, to serve, whether it's in the army, in the police, National Guards. There are many ways to save the country. And when people serve, they also become much better citizens, much more productive citizens, whether it's in economy, high-tech, culture, in every way. But Ari, we're not Sparta. We're not a nation that just, is based on strengths and fighting and warriors. Yes, we are strong warriors, but it's not just about that. We can also be Athens. Music, culture, good food, wine. We're happy people. We like good life. We like to travel. We like to smile and laugh. I always say that I consider myself a very serious warrior, but I also play the piano and clarinet. I like classical music. I go to concerts. I like to go to good restaurants. I like wine. You can have a good life and also be a good warrior. I don't see why it should clash, But these two important things cannot be sustained without really being connected to your Jewish Zionist values. And this is a lesson for every Jew. It's all about spirit. It's all about values. We're not going to win this war because of the amount of forces or the munitions or the technology. It's just about spirit. Really about our ability to understand what we're fighting for. And for this, you need to deeply be connected to your Jewish roots, to our story as people who came back to the country, Zionism. So you really need to do the connection of dots, between Sparta, Athens, and Jerusalem. And this is the way to build a very, very strong society. And I believe that, unfortunately, as much as we want to fight anti-Semitism, I don't see it stopping. And I see millions of Jews coming to Israel in the future. And our responsibility in Israel is to make sure that when they come, this country is safe, is strong, is prosperous, it's big enough to really be the home of all the Jewish people. And we have a big mission here in the coming year too, to really fortify Israel, make it strong, make it prosperous, and through that also securing the whole Jewish world.
Well, thank you, Amir. I know I enjoyed that immensely, and I think that our viewers also enjoyed that. I want to remind everybody to see more episodes like this. Like, share, subscribe, and follow us. And on that note, Am Yisrael Chai.
Am Yisrael Chai.